The champagne tasted like betrayal, but I kept drinking it anyway. After all, it was my own retirement party, and the only thing missing was joy. And maybe a decent whiskey instead of this overpriced sparkling wine that my law firm's partners had selected to celebrate my voluntary departure from Monroe, Barrett Associates. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I stood on the rooftop terrace of our downtown Chicago office building, watching the city lights twinkle below like distant stars, while around me the cream of legal society pretended to care that Julian Monroe was finally calling it quits at 42. The irony wasn't lost on me that the firm still bore my name, even though I'd been systematically pushed out by younger, hungrier lawyers who thought I was too old-fashioned for the modern legal world. Julian, darling, you look positively morose. My wife Adriana glided up beside me, her perfectly manicured hand touching my arm with the kind of calculated affection that had replaced genuine warmth years ago. She looked stunning in her black cocktail dress, her blonde hair swept up in an elegant chignon that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. At 39, she still turned heads wherever she went, and she knew it. Just contemplating my golden years, I replied, taking another sip of the offensive champagne. You know, wondering if I'll take up golf or gardening. Maybe learn to paint watercolors of sad clowns. Adriana's laugh was like crystal breaking. Oh, Julian, always with the sarcasm. That's exactly why the partners thought it was time for you to explore new opportunities. New opportunities. That was corporate speak for, we're shoving you out the door because you won't play the game our way. But I'd built this firm from nothing, working 18-hour days while Adriana spent my money on spa treatments and shopping trips with her equally vapid friends. Speaking of which, I spotted Megan and Lila huddled near the bar, whispering and giggling like schoolgirls. Megan, a sharp-faced brunette who worked in marketing, had been Adriana's closest friend since college. Lila, a redhead with more money than sense, was married to a pharmaceutical executive and spent her days organizing charity galas that raised more money for her social status than for actual causes. I should go mingle, I said, but Adriana's grip tightened on my arm. Actually, Julian, there's something we need to discuss. Her voice had taken on that particular tone I'd learned to dread over our 20 years of marriage. It was the same tone she'd used when she wanted to redecorate the house, or when she'd decided we needed a vacation home in the Hamptons, or when she'd announced that our kids Ross and Tara would be attending private schools that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Can it wait until we get home? I'd rather not have a domestic discussion in front of my colleagues. Oh, but Julian, this is the perfect venue. She smiled, and for the first time I noticed that several people had stopped their conversations and were watching us. Ross and Tara, our 22 and 19-year-old children, had materialized from somewhere and were standing nearby with expressions I couldn't quite read. My son Ross, fresh out of Northwestern with a business degree and an attitude problem, was smirking slightly. Tara, home from her sophomore year at Yale, looked like she was trying not to laugh. That's when I saw him. Nick Barrett standing near the elevator doors with a champagne flute in his hand and a smile on his face that made me freeze. Nick was one of the partners who'd been instrumental in my forced retirement. He was also, I was beginning to realize, far too interested in my wife's well-being for a mere business associate. Adriana, what's going on? I asked, but she was already reaching into her purse. Julian Monroe, she said, her voice carrying across the rooftop terrace. You are hereby served with divorce papers. The manila envelope appeared in her hands like a magic trick. Around us, conversations stopped entirely. Someone's phone camera flashed. I could hear Megan giggling somewhere behind me. I stared at the envelope, then at my wife's triumphant face, then at my children who were watching this spectacle with what appeared to be approval. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't just a divorce. This was a public execution, carefully orchestrated and timed for maximum humiliation. "You want me to use your pen?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. "Or would you prefer a ceremonial dagger?" More laughter from the crowd. Someone was definitely filming this. I could see phones pointed in our direction from multiple angles. This would be on social media within minutes, shared and reshared until everyone in Chicago's legal and social circles had seen Julian Monroe get destroyed by his own wife at his own retirement party. I opened the envelope and scanned the papers. Adriana's lawyer had been thorough. She wanted the house, half my retirement fund, alimony, and sole custody of our adult children's trust funds. She was claiming emotional abandonment, workaholism, and a dozen other grounds that would paint me as a neglectful husband who deserved everything he was getting. "Well," I said, looking up at the crowd of faces watching my downfall, "this is certainly more entertaining than my usual retirement party speech about the good old days and the bright future ahead." I signed the papers with a pen that Nick Barrett helpfully provided. How thoughtful of him. When I handed them back to Adriana, I leaned in close enough to whisper in her ear, "You have no idea what you just did." She laughed, actually laughed, and stepped back so everyone could see her victory. "Oh, Julian, always so dramatic. Don't worry, you'll be fine. You're a survivor." I looked around at the faces surrounding me, my law partners, who'd pushed me out of my own firm, my wife, who'd just publicly humiliated me in front of everyone I knew, my children, who clearly thought their father was a pathetic relic who deserved this treatment, my former friends, who were already whispering among themselves about how they'd seen this coming. "Well," I announced to the crowd, raising my champagne glass in a mock toast, "thank you all for attending my retirement party. It's been educational. I hope you've all enjoyed the entertainment." I drained the glass, set it on a nearby table, and walked toward the elevator. Behind me, I could hear the buzz of excited conversation starting up again. They thought they'd witnessed the end of Julian Monroe's story. They thought I was finished, ruined, broken. How adorable. As the elevator doors closed, I caught a glimpse of Adriana in Nick Barrett's arms, accepting congratulations from the crowd like she'd just won an Academy Award. My children were already on their phones, probably sharing the video with their friends. They had no idea they'd just declared war on the wrong man. 3 weeks later, I was living in a studio apartment that smelled like disinfectant and disappointment, eating takeout Chinese food and watching my former life unravel on social media. The video of my public divorce had gone viral, shared thousands of times with captions like, "Lawyer gets served," and "Retirement party from hell." I'd become a meme, a cautionary tale, a punchline. My phone buzzed constantly with calls from reporters wanting quotes about my shocking divorce, from former colleagues offering hollow sympathy, and from my children asking for money. Ross had called yesterday to inform me that he needed help with his rent since his trust fund was tied up in legal proceedings. Tara wanted money for spring break in Cabo. Neither of them seemed particularly concerned about their father's emotional well-being. The apartment was a far cry from the 4-bedroom colonial in Lincoln Park that I'd called home for 15 years. Here, I could hear my neighbors fighting through paper-thin walls, and the view from my single window was of a brick wall covered in graffiti. But it was temporary. Everything about my current situation was temporary. I was reviewing bank statements when someone knocked on my door. I opened it to find Tom Allerton, my old law school roommate, and one of the few people who hadn't abandoned me after the divorce spectacle. Tom was a private investigator now, specializing in corporate fraud and matrimonial cases. He was also one of the smartest people I'd ever known, with a dry sense of humor that matched my own. "Jesus, Julian, this place is depressing," he said, looking around my cramped apartment. "It's like a monk's cell, if monks were really into self-pity." "It builds character," I replied, clearing law books off the only chair so he could sit down. "Besides, it's motivating. Nothing makes you want to destroy your enemies quite like living next to a meth lab." Tom laughed. Speaking of destroying enemies, I brought you something. He handed me a manila folder. Remember how you asked me to look into your wife's activities? Well, let's just say Adriana hasn't been as discreet as she thinks. I opened the folder and felt my heart rate spike. Inside were photographs of Adriana and Nick Barrett at various restaurants, hotels, and social events dating back almost 2 years. There were credit card receipts showing Nick paying for expensive dinners and weekend getaways. There were text message printouts that made my stomach turn. Can't wait to see you tonight. Julian's working late again as usual. The Ritz-Carlton, room 1247. I'll be waiting. After the divorce goes through, we can finally be together properly. How did you get these? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Adriana's not as tech-savvy as she thinks. She backed up all her photos and messages to a cloud account that she forgot to secure. And Nick's even dumber. He used his corporate credit card for half these expenses. His accounting department has records of everything. I studied the photographs. In one, Adriana and Nick were kissing in the lobby of an expensive hotel. In another, they were holding hands at a restaurant I recognized as the place where Adriana had told me she was having dinner with Megan. The timestamps showed that their affair had been going on for almost the entire time Nick had been pushing me out of the law firm. There's more, Tom said. I did some digging into Nick's finances. He's not as successful as he pretends to be. His hedge fund is hemorrhaging money, and he's been using client funds to maintain his lifestyle. He needs Adriana's divorce settlement to stay afloat. The picture was becoming clearer. Nick hadn't just stolen my wife. He'd orchestrated my professional downfall to cover up his own financial problems. The forced retirement, the public humiliation, the divorce. It was all part of a plan to destroy me and take everything I'd worked for. What do you want to do with this information? Tom asked. I looked at the evidence spread across my coffee table. Photos, receipts, bank records, text messages, everything I needed to prove that my wife and my former partner had conspired against me. In the old Julian Monroe's world, I would have taken this to court, filed motions, sought justice through proper legal channels. But the old Julian Monroe was gone. He died on that rooftop terrace 3 weeks ago, in front of a crowd of people who'd pretended to respect him while they watched his destruction with barely concealed glee. I want to bury them, I said. Not legally, socially, financially, emotionally. I want them to lose everything they care about, the same way they destroyed everything I cared about. Tom smiled. Now you're talking. You want dirt, or do you want to obliterate them completely? Complete obliteration sounds perfect. Over the next hour, Tom and I laid out a plan. Adriana's world revolved around her social status, her PR firm, and her reputation as Chicago's perfect society wife. Nick's power came from his hedge fund, his client relationships, and his image as a successful financial advisor. They'd used my public humiliation to elevate themselves. Now it was time to return the favor. One more thing, Tom said as he was leaving. I have a contact at Channel 7 News, Jennifer Walsh, investigative reporter. She's been looking into financial fraud in the hedge fund industry. She might be very interested in Nick's creative accounting methods. After Tom left, I sat in my depressing apartment looking at the evidence of my wife's betrayal. 20 years of marriage, reduced to a folder full of photographs and receipts. 2 decades of building a life together, destroyed by greed and ambition, and the kind of casual cruelty that comes naturally to people who think they're untouchable. My phone buzzed. A text from Adriana. Ross needs money for rent. Can you transfer $2,000 to his account? Thanks. No, please. No, how are you doing? Just a demand for money from the man she'd publicly humiliated 3 weeks ago. The woman who was currently living in our house with her lover, spending my money and planning their future together. I typed back, "Tell Ross to ask his mother's boyfriend for rent money." The response came immediately. "Don't be petty, Julian. Ross is your son. So is his trust fund. Maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to air our personal business in front of half of Chicago. My phone rang. Adriana's name appeared on the screen. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to her message. Julian, you're being ridiculous. This divorce doesn't change the fact that you're still Ross and Tara's father. They need your support. Call me back so we can discuss this like adults. Like adults. The woman who'd served me divorce papers at my own retirement party wanted to discuss things like adults. I deleted the message and opened my laptop. It was time to start researching Adriana's PR firm, her clients, and her professional reputation. If she wanted to play games, I was going to teach her that some games have consequences she never saw coming. The old Julian Monroe would have paid Ross's rent and tried to maintain some dignity in defeat. But the old Julian Monroe was gone, and the new one was just getting started. Adriana's PR firm, Voss Communications, occupied the entire 15th floor of a gleaming downtown office building. She'd built it from nothing over the past decade, specializing in crisis management and reputation rehabilitation for Chicago's elite. Her client list included politicians, celebrities, and business leaders who needed someone to make their scandals disappear. The irony was delicious. The woman who made a living cleaning up other people's messes was about to discover what it felt like when your own life became the mess. I spent 2 weeks studying her business, her clients, and her methods. Adriana was good at her job, I had to admit. She'd successfully buried a city councilman's gambling addiction, rehabilitated a tech CEO's image after a harassment scandal, and convinced the public that a pharmaceutical company's dangerous side effects were just unfortunate coincidences. But she had one fatal weakness. She trusted the wrong people. Megan Torres, her best friend and business partner, handled the firm's social media accounts and had access to all their confidential client information. Lila Richardson managed their event planning and had contacts throughout Chicago's social scene. Both women were loyal to Adriana, but loyalty had its limits, especially when money was involved. I arranged to meet Megan at a coffee shop near her apartment. She arrived looking nervous, constantly checking her phone and glancing around like she expected to be followed. "Julian, I'm not sure this is a good idea," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. "Adriana would eliminate me if she knew I was talking to you." "Adriana's not going to find out," I assured her. "Unless you tell her. And why would you do that? We're just having coffee. 2 old friends catching up." Megan had never been particularly bright, but she wasn't stupid enough to miss the implications. "What do you want, Julian?" "I want to make you an offer, a business proposition that could be very profitable for both of us." I slid a folder across the table. Inside were financial records showing that Voss Communications was in serious trouble. Adriana had been using company funds to finance her lifestyle, and several major clients were threatening to leave because of the negative publicity surrounding her divorce. "How did you get this?" Megan asked, her face going pale as she read through the documents. "I'm a lawyer, Megan. I know how to find information. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" She looked up at me, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. Megan had always been ambitious, always felt overshadowed by Adriana's success and charisma. She'd been the loyal second-in-command for years, watching Adriana take credit for her ideas and build a fortune while paying Megan a modest salary. "What kind of business proposition?" she asked. "I'm starting my own consulting firm. I need someone with your skills and connections, someone who understands the PR business from the inside." I paused, letting that sink in. The salary would be triple what Adriana's paying you, plus equity in the company. It was a lie, of course. I had no intention of starting a consulting firm. But Megan didn't need to know that. She just needed to believe that I was offering her a way out of Adriana's shadow and into a better life. "I can't just quit," she said. "Adriana depends on me." "Adriana's going to fire you anyway," I replied, pointing to one of the financial documents. She's planning to downsize the company to cut costs. Your name is on the list of employees to be terminated. Another lie, but a believable one. Megan's loyalty to Adriana was based on friendship and financial necessity. Remove the financial security, and the friendship wouldn't be enough to keep her in line. I need time to think about this, she said, but I could see she'd already made her decision. Of course, take all the time you need, but don't take too long. Opportunities like this don't last forever. 2 days later, Megan called me. I'm in, she said. What do you need me to do? I need access to Adriana's client files, specifically any information about ongoing cases, confidential strategies, and client contact information. That's illegal, Julian. I could go to prison. Only if you get caught. And why would you get caught? You're just doing your job, accessing files you have every right to see. What happens to that information after you've seen it is completely out of your control. The next week, I received a package containing photocopies of every confidential file in Voss Communications database. Client strategies, private communications, financial records, and most importantly, a list of every skeleton in every closet that Adriana had helped hide over the past decade. I spent 3 days reading through the files, taking notes, and planning my next moves. Then, I started making phone calls. The first call went to Jennifer Walsh at Channel 7 News. Ms. Walsh, I have information about a PR firm that's been helping clients cover up criminal activity. Are you interested in a story about corruption in Chicago's elite circles? The second call went to the Chicago Tribune's investigative team. I have documents showing that several prominent politicians have been using a PR firm to hide illegal campaign contributions and personal scandals. The third call went to the FBI's white-collar crime division. I have evidence of a conspiracy to obstruct justice involving multiple high-profile individuals. I didn't mention Adriana's name in any of these calls. I didn't have to. The evidence spoke for itself, and it all pointed back to Voss Communications. The story broke on a Friday morning. Channel 7 led with an exposé titled, "The Scandal Cleaners: How One PR Firm Helped Chicago's Elite Cover-Up Crimes." The Tribune followed with a front-page investigation into political corruption and media manipulation. By noon, the FBI had raided Voss Communications offices and seized all their computers and files. I watched the news coverage from my apartment, drinking coffee and feeling satisfied for the first time in weeks. On screen, reporters were interviewing former clients who claimed they'd been blackmailed by Adriana. Politicians were denying any wrongdoing while simultaneously distancing themselves from her company. The mayor's office issued a statement saying they were deeply concerned about the allegations. My phone rang. Adriana's name appeared on the screen. "Julian, you bastard! I know this was you." Her voice was shaking with rage and panic. "How could you do this to me? I'm your wife." "Ex-wife," I corrected. "And you're the one who wanted to play games in public. I'm just better at playing them than you are. This will destroy everything I've worked for." "Yes, I know. That's the point. The FBI is treating me like a criminal. They're going through everything, Julian. Everything." "Then you'd better hope you haven't done anything criminal, Adriana. Though based on what I've seen, I wouldn't be too optimistic about that." She was crying now, which was oddly satisfying. "Please, Julian, you have to help me. Call off your dogs. I'll give you whatever you want." "What I want is for you to understand what it feels like to have your life destroyed in public by someone you trusted. Congratulations, Adriana. Now you know." I hung up and turned back to the television. The news was showing footage of Nick Barrett being escorted out of his office building by federal agents. Apparently, the investigation into Voss Communications had uncovered some interesting irregularities in his hedge fund's accounting practices. 2 birds with 1 stone. How efficient. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom. "Saw the news. Nice work. What's next?" I typed back, "This is just the beginning. They wanted to destroy Julian Monroe in public. Let's see how they like being destroyed in return. The war was just getting started, and I was finally winning. The fallout from the Voss communications scandal was swift and brutal. Within a week, Adriana had lost half her clients. Her business partnership with Megan had dissolved in a storm of accusations and lawsuits, and her reputation as Chicago's premier crisis manager had been obliterated. The woman who'd made a career out of making other people's problems disappear suddenly couldn't make her own problems go away. But the real satisfaction came from watching Nick Barrett's world crumble. The FBI's investigation into his hedge fund had uncovered a web of financial fraud that made Adriana's PR scandals look like minor ethical lapses. He'd been using client money to fund his lavish lifestyle, creating fake investment reports to hide his losses, and manipulating stock prices through a network of shell companies. The irony was perfect. Nick had pushed me out of my own law firm to cover up his financial problems, but in the end, his crimes were too big to hide behind my destruction. I was reading about Nick's arrest in the Tribune when Ross called. "Dad, what the hell is going on?" My son's voice was tight with anger and panic. "Mom's company is all over the news, and now Nick's been arrested. People are saying you're behind all of this." "People say a lot of things, Ross. Most of it's nonsense." "Don't play games with me, Dad. Did you do this?" I considered lying, but what was the point? Ross was 22 years old enough to understand how the world really worked. "Your mother and Nick destroyed my career and humiliated me in front of everyone I knew. Did you think there wouldn't be consequences?" "Jesus Christ, Dad, you've ruined everything. Mom might go to prison. Nick's already been charged with fraud." "And whose fault is that, Ross?" "Mine, for exposing their crimes, or theirs, for committing crimes in the first place. You're supposed to be the adult here. You're supposed to be better than this." I laughed, actually laughed. "Better than what? Better than your mother, who served me divorce papers at my own retirement party? Better than Nick, who stole my wife and my career while embezzling money from his clients? Better than you and your sister, who stood there smiling while I was publicly humiliated?" Ross was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller, less certain. "We didn't know about the affair, Dad. We thought you and Mom were getting divorced like normal people. Normal people don't turn their divorce into public entertainment, Ross. Normal people don't invite their lover to watch while they destroy their spouse's reputation. Your mother chose to make this a war, and now she's losing it. What about us? What about me and Tara? We're your kids, Dad. This affects us too." He was right, of course. Ross and Tara were collateral damage in my war against Adriana and Nick. They'd chosen sides, but they were still my children. The question was whether I cared more about their well-being than I did about my revenge. The answer was complicated. "You and Tara made your choice when you stood there laughing while your mother destroyed me," I said. "You wanted to be part of her world instead of mine. Well, congratulations. Now you get to live with the consequences of that choice. Dad, please, we need your help. Mom's assets are frozen because of the investigation. Tara can't pay her tuition, and I can't make rent. We don't have anywhere else to turn." "You have Nick," I replied. "Oh, wait. He's in federal custody. Maybe you should have thought about that before you decided he was a better father figure than I was." I hung up and immediately felt a stab of guilt. Ross and Tara were adults, but they were still my children. They'd made mistakes, but they didn't deserve to suffer for their mother's crimes. Or did they? The old Julian Monroe would have written a check immediately, would have put his children's needs ahead of his own desire for revenge. But the old Julian Monroe had been weak, had allowed himself to be manipulated and betrayed by people who should have loved him. The new Julian Monroe understood that love without respect was worthless, and that sometimes the only way to earn respect was through fear. My phone buzzed with a text from Tara. "Dad, please call me. I need to talk to you about Mom and everything that's happening. I'm scared." I stared at the message for a long time. Tara was 19, barely an adult, caught up in a situation that was spiraling beyond anyone's control. She'd laughed at my humiliation, but she was still my daughter. I called her back. "Dad, thank God," she said, and I could hear the relief in her voice. "I've been trying to reach you for days. I've been busy. What do you need, Tara?" "I need to come home. I can't stay at Mom's house anymore. There are reporters outside all the time, and FBI agents keep showing up with search warrants. It's like living in a nightmare." "Your mother's house isn't my problem anymore. She made that very clear." "Dad, please. I know you're angry, and I know we handled the divorce thing badly, but I'm your daughter. I need your help." The desperation in her voice was real. Whatever else Tara had done, she was genuinely frightened and alone. Adriana was too busy dealing with federal investigators to take care of her daughter, and Nick was in jail awaiting trial. "Where are you now?" I asked. "I'm at Northwestern, staying with friends. But I can't keep doing this forever. I need somewhere permanent to live, and I need help with tuition. All of Mom's accounts are frozen." "What about Ross?" "Ross is staying with his girlfriend, but her parents don't want him there long term. He's looking for a job, but nobody wants to hire someone whose family is all over the news for fraud and corruption." I felt another stab of guilt. My children were paying the price for their parents' war, and while they'd chosen sides, they'd done so without understanding the full consequences of their choice. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "Dad, I'm sorry. About the party, about everything. I didn't understand what was really happening. I thought it was just a normal divorce, and Mom told us you were okay with it." "Your mother told you I was okay with being publicly humiliated?" "She said it was your idea. She said you wanted to make a dramatic exit from the law firm, and that the divorce papers were just part of the show. She said you were both laughing about it afterward." I closed my eyes. Of course, Adriana had lied to the children. She'd manipulated them into participating in my humiliation by convincing them it was all just an elaborate joke. They hadn't been cruel. They'd been deceived. "Tara, your mother lied to you. About the divorce, about my retirement, about everything. I had no idea what was going to happen at that party." "I know that now. I figured it out when I saw how upset you were, and when all this other stuff started coming out about Mom and Nick. Dad, I'm so sorry. We should have known better." "Yes, you should have. But you were lied to by someone you trusted. I understand that. Does that mean you'll help us?" I looked around my depressing studio apartment, at the evidence of my fallen life, at the newspaper articles about my ex-wife's crimes spread across my coffee table. I thought about Ross and Tara, scared and alone, learning that their mother was a criminal, and their father was the man who'd exposed her crimes to the world. "I'll help you," I said, "but there are conditions." "Anything, Dad. Whatever you want. First, you and Ross cut off all contact with your mother until this legal mess is resolved. I won't have my children being used as pawns in her games anymore." "Okay. That's probably for the best anyway." "Second, you both get jobs. Real jobs, not internships or part-time work. You're adults now, and it's time you learned to support yourselves." "I understand." "Third, you apologize. Publicly. You both make statements to the press explaining that you were deceived by your mother and that you're sorry for participating in my humiliation." There was a long pause. "Dad, that's really hard. It would be admitting that we were wrong in front of everyone." "Yes, it would. Just like I was humiliated in front of everyone at that party. The difference is I didn't deserve it. You two participated in something terrible, even if you didn't understand what you were doing. If you want my help, you need to make it right." "Okay," she said quietly. "We'll do it. Whatever it takes." "Good. I'll transfer money for your tuition tomorrow, and I'll help Ross with his rent until he finds a job. But Tara, this is your last chance. If you betray me again, if you choose your mother's side over mine, You're on your own permanently." "I won't, Dad. I promise. We both learned our lesson." After I hung up, I sat in my apartment feeling conflicted. Helping Ross and Tara was the right thing to do, but it also meant showing mercy in a war where mercy could be seen as weakness. Adriana would try to use my relationship with my children against me, would try to manipulate them into betraying me again. But they were still my children, and despite everything that had happened, I still loved them. The question was whether love was a strength or a weakness in the war I was fighting. I supposed I was about to find out. Nick Barrett's arrest had been satisfying, but his legal troubles were just the beginning. Federal charges moved slowly through the court system, and I wanted him to suffer more immediately and more personally. Prison would eventually claim him, but first, I wanted to destroy everything he valued: his reputation, his social status, and his relationship with my ex-wife. The opportunity came 3 weeks later, when Tom informed me that Nick had been released on bail pending trial. His passport had been confiscated and his assets frozen, but he was free to move around Chicago while awaiting his day in court. More importantly, he was desperate to salvage what remained of his life. "He's been calling everyone he knows, trying to rebuild his client base," Tom reported over coffee at a diner near my apartment. "Most people won't take his calls, but he's managed to set up a few meetings with potential investors who think they can get a good deal from a desperate man." "Where is he living?" I asked. "He's staying at Adriana's house. Apparently, they're supporting each other through this difficult time." Tom's tone made it clear what he thought of their mutual support. Perfect. Nick and Adriana, trapped together in a house that was probably under FBI surveillance, trying to pretend their relationship was based on love rather than mutual criminal conspiracy. The stress had to be enormous. "I want to arrange a meeting with him," I said. "What kind of meeting?" "The kind where he thinks he's going to get something he wants, but instead gets something he deserves." Tom grinned. "What did you have in mind?" I outlined my plan over the next hour. It was complex, risky, and required precise timing, but if it worked, it would accomplish something that mere legal proceedings never could. It would destroy Nick Barrett's soul. The setup took 2 weeks to arrange. Through a series of intermediaries, I let it be known that I was interested in making a deal with Nick. Despite our personal animosity, I was supposedly willing to invest in his new hedge fund in exchange for a share of the profits and his promise to leave Chicago permanently after his legal troubles were resolved. It was exactly the kind of offer a desperate man would find irresistible, a chance to rebuild his financial empire with money from the very man he'd betrayed, while also getting permission to escape the scene of his crimes with his dignity somewhat intact. The meeting was set for Thursday evening at the Union League Club, one of Chicago's most exclusive private clubs. I'd maintained my membership despite my reduced circumstances, and the club's dining room provided the perfect setting for what I had planned, public enough to ensure witnesses, but private enough for intimate conversation. Nick arrived 15 minutes late, looking haggard and nervous. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit was wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he wasn't sleeping well. The stress of federal charges and public disgrace was clearly taking its toll. "Julian," he said, extending his hand as he approached my table. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I know this situation is complicated." "Complicated is one word for it," I replied, shaking his hand briefly. "Sit down, Nick. We have a lot to discuss." He settled into the chair across from me, glancing around nervously at the other diners. The Union League Club attracted Chicago's business elite, and several people had already recognized Nick from his recent media coverage. I could see them whispering and pointing discreetly. "I want you to know that I never intended for things to go this far," Nick began. "The situation with Adriana, the problems at the firm, the federal charges, none of this was supposed to happen." What was supposed to happen, Nick? You steal my wife, destroy my career, and then what? We all live happily ever after? He flinched. It wasn't like that. Adriana and our relationship developed naturally. We didn't plan it. But you did plan my forced retirement. That was deliberate. The partners felt it was time for new leadership. It wasn't personal. Everything about it was personal, and we both know it. But let's not rehash the past. You asked for this meeting because you need money, and I'm here because I might be willing to provide it. Nick's eyes lit up with desperate hope. You'd really consider investing in my new fund? I'd consider it, but I'd need guarantees, contracts, legal protections to ensure that my investment is secure. Of course. Whatever you need. I pulled out a folder containing fake financial documents that Tom had helped me create. They showed a fictional investment fund worth several $1,000,000, money that Nick believed I had hidden from the divorce proceedings. This is what I'm prepared to invest, I said, sliding the documents across the table. $5 million with the potential for additional funding if your returns meet my expectations. Nick's hands shook as he read through the papers. $5 million would be enough to restart his career, to pay his legal bills, and to rebuild the life that federal prosecutors were trying to destroy. Julian, I don't know what to say. After everything that's happened between us, why would you do this? Because I'm a businessman, Nick. Personal feelings aside, you were good at what you did before you started embezzling client funds. With proper oversight and legal constraints, you might be good at it again. I never embezzled anything, he said automatically, but his heart wasn't in the denial. Of course not. That's just what the FBI thinks. But regardless of what happened in the past, I'm interested in future profits. The question is whether you're willing to accept my terms. What terms? I leaned forward, lowering my voice so that only Nick could hear me. First, you plead guilty to all federal charges and cooperate fully with prosecutors. I won't invest in a fund run by a man who might go to prison for 20 years. His face went pale. Julian, I can't do that. If I plead guilty, I'll definitely go to prison. If you plead guilty and cooperate, you might get 5 years instead of 20. If you fight the charges and lose, you'll spend the rest of your life in federal prison, which sounds like a better deal. But if I cooperate, I'd have to testify against other people who trusted me. People like Adriana? He nodded miserably. That brings me to my second condition. You end your relationship with my ex-wife immediately and permanently. You move out of her house, you stop taking her calls, and you never see her again. Julian, I can't do that. I love her. I laughed, loud enough that several nearby diners turned to look at us. You love her? Nick, you're facing federal fraud charges because you embezzled money to pay for your affair with her. She's facing her own legal troubles because she helped you launder money through her PR firm. This isn't love. It's mutual destruction. You don't understand our relationship. I understand it perfectly. You're both criminals who got caught, and now you're clinging to each other because nobody else will have you. But here's the thing, Nick. Adriana doesn't actually love you. She never did. You were just a way for her to upgrade her lifestyle and get revenge on me for being a boring husband. That's not true, isn't it? Tell me, Nick, when the FBI raided your office, was Adriana there to support you? When you were arrested, did she visit you in jail? When your assets were frozen, did she offer to help you financially? His silence was answer enough. She's using you, just like she used me. The only difference is that I was too stupid to see it for 20 years. You figured it out in 2, but you're too desperate to admit it. Nick stared at the fake investment documents, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Greed, desperation, and wounded pride warred with whatever genuine feelings he might have had for Adriana. If I agree to your terms, he said finally, when would I get the money? After you plead guilty, and after you end things with Adriana, not before. And you'd really give me $5 million? After everything I've done to you? I smiled. Nick, I'm not giving you anything. This is an investment, not a gift. I expect a return on my money with interest. If you default on our agreement, I'll own everything you have left." He nodded eagerly. "I understand. Business is business." "Exactly. Business is business." We shook hands across the table, and I could see the relief flooding through him. He thought he'd found a way out of his nightmare, a path back to respectability and financial security. He had no idea that the documents in his hands were worthless, that the investment fund didn't exist, and that I had no intention of giving him a single dollar. But he'd find out soon enough. "There's just one more thing," I said, as we prepared to leave. "I want you to tell Adriana about our deal personally. Tonight. I want her to know that you're planning to testify against her and that you're ending your relationship to get my money." "Julian, that's cruel. It'll destroy her." "Good. She destroyed me in public, in front of everyone I knew. Now it's her turn to feel what that's like." Nick looked uncomfortable, but he nodded. The promise of $5 million was worth more to him than Adriana's feelings, which told me everything I needed to know about the depth of his love for my ex-wife. I watched him leave the club, walking with a spring in his step that hadn't been there when he arrived. Tomorrow, he would call his lawyers and arrange to change his plea. Tomorrow, he would break Adriana's heart and destroy their relationship. Tomorrow, he would discover that the investment documents were fake and that Julian Monroe had played him for a fool. But tonight, for a few hours, Nick Barrett would believe that he'd found salvation, and that made what was coming next even sweeter. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait for it to spring. The call came at 2:47 a.m. Adriana's name flashed on my phone screen, and even though I'd been expecting her call, the timing surprised me. I'd thought it would take Nick longer to work up the courage to tell her about our fake deal. "You bastard," she hissed the moment I answered. "You lying, manipulative bastard." "Good morning to you too, Adriana. Though technically it's still night. Couldn't sleep." "Nick told me about your meeting, about your sick little offer. How could you do this to me?" I sat up in bed, fully awake now and savoring every word of her pain. "Do what to you, exactly? Make a business deal with your boyfriend? I thought you'd be happy that Nick found a way to rebuild his career. You know exactly what you're doing. You're trying to destroy my relationship with Nick, and you're bribing him to testify against me." "I'm not bribing anyone, Adriana. I'm offering to invest in a legitimate business venture with reasonable conditions to protect my investment. If Nick chooses to cooperate with federal prosecutors, that's his decision." "This is about revenge. You can't stand that I'm happy with someone else." I laughed. "Happy? Adriana, you're facing federal charges for money laundering and obstruction of justice. Your business is ruined, your reputation is destroyed, and your boyfriend is about to plead guilty to fraud charges. If this is your definition of happiness, I'd hate to see what misery looks like. I love him, Julian, and he loves me. You can't buy that away from me." "Love? Is that what you call it when Nick told you he was taking my deal? When he admitted he'd rather have my money than your relationship? That's not love, Adriana. That's just two desperate people clinging to each other while they drown." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Adriana spoke again, her voice was smaller, more vulnerable than I'd heard it in years. "Please, Julian, I'm begging you. Don't do this. Don't destroy what little I have left. The way you destroyed what little I had left? At my own retirement party, in front of everyone I knew? I made a mistake. I was angry, and I wanted to hurt you, but I never meant for it to go this far. You served me divorce papers in public, Adriana. You turned my professional farewell into a humiliation circus. You invited your lover to watch while you destroyed 20 years of marriage, and you convinced our children to participate in the spectacle. That wasn't a mistake. That was calculated cruelty. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Julian, but please, don't take Nick away from me. He's all I have left." You should have thought about that before you decided to make war on me. What do you want? Money? I'll give you whatever you want. Just leave Nick alone. What I want is for you to understand what it feels like to lose everything you care about in front of an audience. What I want is for you to experience the same humiliation, the same betrayal, the same complete destruction of your life that you inflicted on me. You've already done that. My business is ruined, I'm probably going to prison, and everyone in Chicago thinks I'm a criminal. Isn't that enough? No, it's not enough. Because through all of this, you've had Nick. You've had someone who claimed to love you, someone to support you through your legal troubles. I had nobody. When you destroyed me, I was completely alone. Julian, please. Now you're going to know what that feels like. Nick is going to choose my money over your love, and you're going to be alone with your crimes and your consequences, just like I was alone with mine. I hung up and turned off my phone. Let her call back. I wouldn't answer. The conversation had accomplished everything I'd wanted it to. Adriana now knew that Nick was planning to betray her, and she knew that I was the architect of that betrayal. Her last source of comfort and support was about to disappear, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Except there was one thing she could do, and I was counting on her doing it. The next morning, I met Tom at our usual diner to go over the final details of my plan. Everything was in place: the fake investment documents, the recording equipment, and the exit strategy that would ensure I couldn't be charged with fraud or extortion. "Are you sure Nick will go through with it?" Tom asked over coffee and eggs. "He doesn't have a choice. He's facing 20 years in federal prison, and he thinks I'm offering him a way out. Desperate men make predictable decisions." "And Adriana?" "Adriana will do exactly what I expect her to do. She'll try to stop Nick from taking my deal, and when that fails, she'll try to expose the deal as fake. But by then, it'll be too late." "What if she goes to the police?" "And tells them what? That her boyfriend is planning to testify against her in exchange for an investment that doesn't exist? The police already know Nick is cooperating with prosecutors. As for the fake investment, Nick hasn't given me any money, and I haven't taken anything from him. There's no crime." Tom nodded. "You've thought of everything." "I've had a lot of time to think. 3 months of living in this apartment, watching my life fall apart, planning my revenge. It's amazing how creative you can become when you have nothing left to lose." At 3 p.m., my phone rang. Nick's name appeared on the screen. "Julian, we have a problem," he said without preamble. "Adriana knows about our deal." "Of course she does. You told her, remember? I said I wanted her to know. She's threatening to expose the whole thing. She says she's going to call the FBI and tell them you're trying to bribe me." "Let her call them. You're cooperating with their investigation anyway. That's part of our deal." "But she's also saying the investment is fake. She thinks you're trying to trick me." I paused, letting him hear the uncertainty in my silence. "Nick, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want a direct answer. Do you trust Adriana more than you trust me?" It's not about trust, Julian. It's about being careful." "It's exactly about trust. Adriana is facing federal charges because she helped you launder money. She's desperate, and desperate people say desperate things. I'm offering you a legitimate business opportunity, but if you don't want it, there are other people who do." "No, I want it. I need it. But Adriana is threatening to leave me if I take your deal." "Then you have a choice to make, Nick. You can choose Adriana and spend the next 20 years in federal prison with her love letters to keep you warm. Or you can choose my investment, plead guilty, serve 5 years, and come out with enough money to rebuild your life." She says she loves me, and I'm sure she does, but love doesn't pay legal bills, and it doesn't keep you out of prison. My money can do both. There was a long pause. "If I take your deal, I lose her. If you don't take my deal, you lose everything else." Another pause. "I'll call my lawyer and arrange to change my plea." "Good. And Nick, don't let Adriana talk you out of this. She's not thinking clearly right now. She's facing her own legal problems, and she's not looking out for your best interests. After I hung up, I sat back and smiled. The trap was closing perfectly. Nick would plead guilty and agree to testify against Adriana, destroying their relationship and her last hope of avoiding prison. And when he discovered that the investment was fake, it would be too late to change his plea or repair his relationship with my ex-wife. But the real beauty of the plan was what would happen next. Adriana, betrayed by Nick and facing prison alone, would become desperate enough to do something stupid, something that would complete her destruction and give me the final revenge I'd been planning for months. I didn't have to wait long. At 6 p.m., there was a knock on my apartment door. I looked through the peephole and saw Adriana standing in the hallway, looking haggard and desperate. She'd been crying, her makeup was smeared, and her usually perfect hair was disheveled. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. "Julian, please, we need to talk." "We talked last night, Adriana. There's nothing left to say." "Nick is making a terrible mistake. You're manipulating him, and he's too desperate to see it clearly. Nick is making the only rational choice available to him. He's facing serious federal charges, and cooperation is his best option. But he doesn't have to testify against me. He could cooperate without destroying me. That's not how federal cooperation agreements work, and you know it. If Nick wants a reduced sentence, he has to give prosecutors something valuable. Unfortunately for you, you're the most valuable thing he has to offer." Tears started flowing down her cheeks. "Please, Julian. I'm begging you. Don't do this to me." "I'm not doing anything to you, Adriana. You did this to yourself when you decided to help Nick launder money. You did this to yourself when you chose to destroy our marriage in the most public and humiliating way possible. I was angry. I wanted to hurt you because you were always working, always putting the firm ahead of our family. I felt ignored and unappreciated. So you had an affair with my business partner and then served me divorce papers at my retirement party? That seems like a proportional response to feeling unappreciated. I made mistakes, Julian. Terrible mistakes. But I don't deserve to go to prison for 20 years. 20 years? That seems optimistic. With the money laundering charges, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy counts, you're probably looking at life in prison." She collapsed against the door frame, sobbing uncontrollably. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. This was the woman I'd loved for 20 years, the mother of my children, reduced to begging in a hallway outside my studio apartment. But then, I remembered the retirement party. I remembered the laughter of the crowd as she handed me divorce papers. I remembered my children smiling as they watched their father's public humiliation. I remembered Nick Barrett's satisfied smirk as he watched his plan unfold perfectly. "There is one thing you could do," I said quietly. She looked up at me with desperate hope. "Anything. I'll do anything. You could confess, publicly. A full confession of your crimes, your affair, and your conspiracy to destroy my career. You could apologize to me, to our children, and to everyone you've hurt. You could take full responsibility for everything that's happened. If I confess publicly, I'll definitely go to prison. You're going to prison anyway, Adriana. The question is whether you go to prison with some dignity intact, or whether you go to prison as a convicted criminal who fought the charges and lost. And if I confess, you'll leave Nick alone?" I smiled. "If you confess, Nick won't matter anymore. He'll have nothing to offer prosecutors, and my investment offer will become irrelevant." It was another lie, of course. Nick had already agreed to change his plea, and the fake investment would be exposed regardless of what Adriana did. But she was desperate enough to believe that her sacrifice could save the man she loved. "I need time to think about it," she said. "You don't have time, Adriana. Nick is meeting with his lawyer tomorrow morning to formalize his plea agreement. If you're going to act, it has to be tonight." She nodded and turned to leave, then stopped and looked back at me. "Julian, do you hate me?" I considered the question seriously. "No, Adriana, I don't hate you. Hate would imply that I still care about you emotionally. What I feel for you is much simpler. I want you to suffer the consequences of your choices, just like I had to suffer the consequences of yours." She walked away without another word, and I closed my door and waited for the final act of my revenge to unfold. At 11 p.m., I turned on Channel 7 News and saw Adriana sitting across from Jennifer Walsh, the investigative reporter who'd broken the original Voss Communications scandal. Adriana looked composed but fragile, like a piece of expensive china that had been cracked but not yet shattered. "Mrs. Monroe," Jennifer was saying, "you've requested this interview to make a statement about the federal charges against you. What do you want the public to know?" "I want them to know the truth," Adriana said, her voice steady but quiet. "I want them to know that I'm guilty of the crimes I've been charged with, and that I take full responsibility for my actions." She confessed to everything: the money laundering, the obstruction of justice, the conspiracy with Nick to cover up his embezzlement. She admitted to her affair and acknowledged that she'd served me divorce papers publicly as an act of revenge for my supposed neglect of our marriage. But the most satisfying part came at the end, when Jennifer asked her about Nick Barrett. "Nick Barrett was my co-conspirator in these crimes," Adriana said, looking directly into the camera. "But he was also the man I loved, and I don't want him to suffer for my mistakes. I'm confessing publicly in the hope that my cooperation will be enough to satisfy prosecutors and that Nick won't have to testify against me or anyone else." It was a noble gesture, a final act of love from a woman who'd lost everything. It was also completely pointless, because Nick had already agreed to testify against her, and my fake investment offer had already served its purpose. But Adriana didn't know that. She thought she was saving the man she loved by sacrificing herself. She thought her public confession would make Nick's cooperation unnecessary and preserve their relationship. She was wrong, of course. By the time her interview aired, Nick had already signed his plea agreement and committed to full cooperation with federal prosecutors. Her confession wouldn't change that, and it certainly wouldn't change the fact that my investment offer was an elaborate fake designed to manipulate him into betraying her. When she found out the truth, when she realized that she'd destroyed herself for nothing, that would be the moment of my complete victory. That would be when Adriana finally understood what it felt like to be betrayed by someone you trusted, humiliated in public, and left with nothing. I turned off the television and went to bed, sleeping better than I had in months. Tomorrow, Adriana would discover that her sacrifice had been meaningless. Tomorrow, Nick would learn that my investment offer was fake. Tomorrow, both of them would understand that Julian Monroe was not the weak, defeated man they'd thought they'd destroyed at that retirement party. Tomorrow, my revenge would be complete. But tonight, for the first time since this war began, I felt at peace.